Russian forces continue to attack logistical routes in the Pokrovsk area, but Ukrainian soldiers do not see this as a sign of encirclement. The troops report only isolated incidents of the enemy appearing near the logistical corridors, and any occupying forces are immediately eliminated.
Russian troops continue to suffer losses, stuck in urban combat. Just in Pokrovsk last month, Ukrainian soldiers eliminated 519 occupiers and wounded 131. Such losses are equivalent to the size of an entire battalion. Since
the beginning of the day, Ukrainian troops have repelled nearly a third of all recorded Russian attacks on the Pokrovsk sector of the front. The defense forces are also effectively conducting counter-sabotage operations in the Pokrovsk area. The enemy's losses are being clarified.
These formidable pincers, they're quite close to each other, but there is absolutely no encirclement whatsoever. Moreover, as I understand it, if our brigades that finished off the Dobropilsky salient, the enemy's bulge, keep operating the same way and continue in the same direction, their strike will hit the flank of the northern Russian pincer. This brief Gerasimov-style maneuver might end up with its claws torn off.
The directions of Konstantinivka, Lyman, and Oleksandrovka remain challenging. There, the defense forces have also repelled about a third of the Russian assaults in total. And in the Kupiansk area, according to military experts, Ukrainian troops have improved the situation.
Our forces are holding the line, while the southern units are trying to clear and push the enemy out of these areas. But most importantly, our units are cutting off the logistical routes to the northwest. And for them, this is already creating a serious situation regarding how they will be supplied.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, since the beginning of the day, Ukrainian soldiers have destroyed 239 Russian operational tactical drones along the entire front line.
A sighted-in rifle. I sighted it in myself. I keep tally marks for the drones I've shot down. I've already got 8 of them.
In addition, just yesterday, a Russian tank, 6 armored fighting vehicles, 14 artillery systems, and 71 units of enemy automotive and special equipment were also destroyed, and 1,060 Russian occupiers were eliminated. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have already reached almost 1,174,000 soldiers.
Pavel Lakishuk, head of military programs at the Center for Globalistics and Strategy 21. He's joining us today. Welcome. Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the Euros. Well, the president of Ukraine, yes, I am quoting directly here so that it's not just coming from me, because, we're not working like Russian propagandists who rush ahead and, claim to capture, settlements. But in reality, they don't capture them. They only do so, in words. Kupiansk has been almost completely cleared of Russian troops. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. I'd like to talk a bit about Kupiansk with you, Pavel, so we can analyze it a little. Let's analyze this direction. Let's look at the Kharkiv region. What's your opinion? The only thing is, I always remember the words of Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, when he said that clearing an area doesn't necessarily mean there's no fighting going on there. But to be fair, that's not about the president's words right now. A clearing operation doesn't automatically mean the fighting is stopped, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the fact that things will be heating up in the Kupiansk direction, that's a given. Since Gerasimov promised Putin in advance to encircle Kupiansk, to encircle Pokrovsk, then Russian soldiers and officers have to fulfill the promises of the Russian chief of the General Staff, even at the cost of their own lives. On the Pokrovsk front, hundreds of thousands of orcs are being thrown in, dying every day. In Kupiansk, on the flanks, they can't concentrate their forces. And they want Huliapol and Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka and Lyman and Kupiansk too. They act like their forces are endless. That's why, on the Kupiansk front, the advance was definitely too far ahead, because there's a river there, and it's a very complicated situation if you want to encircle the city, or not even the city, but a number of settlements from the north and south. They need to establish 2 bridgeheads. From that northern bridgehead, which they did manage to establish, and through which they were infiltrating Kupiansk, this so-called infiltration into the city was happening, but it's clearly not enough to support their forces. And down south, they still haven't managed to cross the river. Well, more precisely, in recent weeks, they've been in the area around Borodenka. Attempts to finally and decisively secure a firm foothold on the right bank ultimately failed to achieve its objective. It's like the fact that our command managed to find reserves, and believe me, reserves are desperately needed everywhere right now, both in the directions of the main offensives and in the directions of the enemy, including the southern direction. Forces and reserves were found to localize the threat. In the north, in the Kupiansk direction. This is a major success for our defenders. We haven't talked about successful operations in the USSR that often lately. It's tough.
Regarding the Pokrovsky direction, once again, the Russian occupiers have missed yet another deadline. It's already the 10th or 20th time, and now it's the end of November, while the defense forces are even achieving some tactical partial successes. I mean, the area where they're throwing in the maximum number of people, the defense forces are holding them off. And the Russian occupiers, yes, they're rearming, trying to attack again, but they can't capture the positions held by the defense forces. Moreover, there's more. I even remembered this day. In the first 10 days in November, Russian military correspondents claimed that the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Pokrovsk direction were completely under Russian control. But as we can see, it's been almost a month and the logistics are still working. The General Staff officially reports that everything is fine in this regard, and the defense forces continue to resist. Could it be that the Second Army of the world is once again showing that all of this is a fiction, that it's all just an information bubble, like those earlier narratives about Putin's invincible army, which, as it turns out, is actually quite beatable, despite having the advantage in manpower, equipment, and missiles?
Wouldn't say that everything is fine with logistics in the Pokrovsky direction. Everything is tough. This is the official statement from the General Staff. Logistics are difficult, but everything is tough with logistics on our side, and everything is tough with logistics for the enemy as well. In fact, the skies over the Pokrovska and Minohad agglomeration are not just controlled from our side, but more broadly, also from the enemy side. Well, you know, this is a battlefield for small aircraft, for drones, both our drones and the enemy's drones. As soon as the autumn fog covers the area, everyone immediately tries to regroup, advance, or, on the contrary, evacuate the wounded and supply their troops. This happens on our side as well as on the Russian side. Another matter is the goals and promises made by Gerasimov, for example. The promises about encirclement made a month ago, it's already been 4 weeks now, about Kupiansk being surrounded, Pokrovsk, Myrnograd being surrounded, never came true. Thousands of Russian soldiers have died during this time just to try to make Gerasimov's lies a reality. The Russians are trying, doing everything they can to encircle Pokrovsk. The Pokrovsk-Myrnograd agglomeration, the Second Army is pushing from the south, from the southwest. The 51st Army is trying to encircle from the north, from the northeast. Let's add urban combat to the mix. But as for encirclement, those pincers, those claws, they're pretty close to each other, but there's still no encirclement. Moreover, as I understand it, if our brigades keep operating the way they have been, those that finished off the Dobropilya salient, that enemy bulge, and if they keep moving in the same direction, their strike will hit the flank of the northern Russian pincer. This Gerasimov crab might very well end up with its formidable claws completely torn off. On the other hand, the significant pressure that the Russians are currently applying right now, in my considered opinion, is most dangerously threatening the city of Myrnograd, and obviously, some of our forces will gradually withdraw to the west in order to reinforce the flanks of the defense, the northern and southern flanks. Of the defense? Well, of this defensive strongpoint. Sorry for the tautology.
Pavel, there's another important point here. It's not just a military blow, but also a political one against Putin and the Russian army. We've seen, by the way, as Syrskyi has also publicly said, he mentioned this earlier about the Pokrovsk direction, and now he's talking about it in the context of Kupiansk, that there are suspiciously a lot of fakes. It's not just Russian propaganda spreading them, but Putin himself, personally. Saying that in Pokrovsk and Myrnohorod, everything is surrounded. But there are 15 battalions in Pokrovsk and Myrnohorod and so on. In Kupiansk, everyone is supposedly waiting for the order to eliminate, and so on. But as practice has shown, that's not true. Aren't these failures, declared as part of the so-called special military operation, also a political blow for Putin and his regime?
I don't even know. If this is really a blow to Putin, 3 or 4 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, Putin was already saying that they had captured Pokrovsk. More precisely, Gerasimov reported to Putin that Pokrovsk had been captured, and Putin nodded his head during his previous visit to Gerasimov's bunker. 3 months later, Gerasimov tells him, with a straight face, he claims that Pokrovsk, now called Myrnograd, is already surrounded, and Putin doesn't even ask him, so did the Ukrainians take it back from us? No, everything's fine. He just goes on talking about how they're already capturing some Komsomolsk, and the speech isn't any smoother, is it? So, Putin lied, and then what? Does the Russian people react in any way to their dictator's lies? No, they just sit quietly in their holes. Whatever they're ordered to do, they... Sorry, but I think our European partners understand that Putin is lying. Maybe the overseas partners understand too, but they just pretend to believe him. That's why Putin lies. Maybe Konashenko couldn't care less about him, but we haven't seen it.
All right, I'd also like to ask, first of all, let me remind everyone again, because there's a lot of different information out there, much of which doesn't actually match the facts or reality. I'm also referring to the military, yes. For example, the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, also stated that Russian troops have not entered Huliaipol in the Zaporizhia region. They were stopped on the approaches to the city. On the Zaporizhia front, the enemy hasn't stopped its assaults, but there are no battles in Huliaipol itself, only ongoing search and strike operations. So, even though there aren't any actual battles today, for example, they could happen tomorrow, right? That's what I want to say. Even just looking at and discussing today's directions, you can see how quickly and dynamically the Russian army's tactics are changing. Can we track this? Or is it more like, they have this tactic and for several weeks in a row, they just keep using it as is, right? Well, it doesn't really work, but we keep doing it anyway.
Well, basically, they just keep using the same tactic all the time. Another thing is that depending on how we hold our defense, this tactic automatically adapts to the tactics of the Ukrainian armed forces. What we now call infiltration tactics, just 2. Years ago, that was a breakthrough tactic. Remember, we used to say the Russians are breaking through our defenses in the Avdiivka direction. Why were they breaking through? Because our defensive density was quite dense, and in order to advance, the Russians had to push some of our positions back. Move them 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters. Now our defensive line is pretty thin, and now they don't have to. Push our strong points around, they find gaps between them where they can slip through. That's why it's called infiltration tactics. But overall, the nature of the enemy's actions remains the same. And then there's the question of the ratio between infantry assaults and mechanized assaults. It can change depending on the terrain, on the weather. On our own part, anti-tank assets in the defensive line, on how well their reconnaissance works, and the nature of fire support can also change. We always talk about FPV drones, about Mavics that illuminate the battlefield, but we often forget to mention air support, especially from the enemy side. These are the glide bombs that level the playing field. And just look at the number of glide bombs they're using, how it's growing every day. This is clearly already a change in tactics. Here, artillery is being replaced by glide bombs. As soon as there's any activity on our side, in certain areas, glide bombs are sent there. In other words, the enemy's air force is being used to the fullest. They're not just churning out Shaheeds. They're making those in the munitions production complex too. So, yes, tactical changes are happening, but we have to. If we don't adapt to them, meaning they find a weakness in our tactics and adjust their own, we need to urgently change ours. Our own tactical methods, because whoever doesn't evolve will lose.
Pavel, and to wrap up, let me clarify one more thing. What about the missile attacks by the Russian Federation, which it periodically carries out against Ukraine? What could be a red line for Putin to make him stop attacking? Maybe sanctions? Maybe political pressure? Is there such a thing in your opinion?
I think if the Kremlin is destroyed along with him, that would be a pretty clear red line, a red point. I don't know what could stop Putin. Sanctions or that are specifically aimed at completely collapsing the Russian economy. What precise level of economic collapse would it truly take for Dad to finally quit drinking, right? I don't know what kind of effort is needed. From the outside, what kind of persuasion is needed from the American president for Putin to say, yeah, I'm not aggressive. Not an aggressive beast, but more of a so-called peacemaker. And then go for some kind of agreements. I can't foresee such scenarios. So far, judging by Putin's statements, his actions, and the actions of his army, Putin believes he can achieve success by military means. Here we are in the 4th year since the defeat near Kyiv. He hasn't lost hope. Gerasimov reports to him and he convinces himself that things are bad right now, but if they just push a little harder, the Ukrainians will collapse. But the Ukrainians aren't collapsing. Not collapsing, that's our main task.
Thank you, Pavel, for your analysis. Pavel Lakachuk, head of military programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21, was with us live.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.